The wedding photos still lined the hallway of Isabella Chen's small apartment in Portland, Oregon, but she'd turned them all face down 6 months ago. She couldn't bear to look at her own smiling face standing next to her sister Rachel at the altar, knowing what she knew now, knowing how wrong everyone had been about everything. The knock on her door at 2 a.m. was soft but insistent. Isabella pulled on a robe and checked the peephole, her heart stopping when she saw her younger sister standing in the hallway, soaking wet from the November rain. Rachel's usually perfect, auburn hair was matted against her head, her designer coat torn at the shoulder, and even through the distorted glass, Isabella could see the bruise forming around her left eye. "Rachel?" Isabella opened the door immediately, pulling her sister inside. "What happened? Where's Marcus?" Rachel Chen Morrison collapsed into Isabella's arms, sobbing with the kind of raw, desperate grief that only comes from complete emotional breakdown. She was shaking uncontrollably, her clothes damp not just from rain but from what Isabella realized was sweat and fear. "He knows I found out," Rachel whispered against Isabella's shoulder. "He knows, Izzy. He's going to kill me." Isabella guided Rachel to the couch, her mind racing back to the events of the past year, to the choice that had made her family and friends call her the worst kind of traitor, the sister who'd destroyed her own flesh and blood's happiness out of jealousy and spite. Rachel had met Marcus Morrison at a charity gala in Seattle 2 years ago. He was everything their traditional Chinese-American parents had dreamed of for their daughters: successful, educated, from a good family. At 35, Marcus was a prominent cardiac surgeon at Seattle Presbyterian, drove a Tesla, owned a waterfront condo in Belltown, and came from old Seattle money. His family had been in the Pacific Northwest for 4 generations, building a fortune in timber and real estate. More importantly, Marcus had seemed to adore Rachel. He'd pursued her with the kind of romantic intensity that made other women jealous. Flowers delivered to her law office every Friday, surprise weekend trips to Napa Valley, thoughtful gifts that showed he'd been listening to her casual comments about things she liked. Rachel, at 28, was a rising associate at one of Seattle's most prestigious law firms, specializing in corporate litigation. She was beautiful, brilliant, and had always been the golden child of the Chen family. Isabella, 3 years older, had chosen a different path: social work, a modest salary, a commitment to helping troubled teenagers that their parents found admirable but impractical. The engagement had been a fairy tale. Marcus had proposed during a private dinner at Canlis, Rachel's favorite restaurant, with a 3-carat diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. The wedding planning had consumed Rachel's life for 8 months, and Isabella had thrown herself into her role as maid of honor with genuine excitement for her sister's happiness. But something had felt wrong from the beginning, though Isabella hadn't been able to articulate what bothered her about Marcus. He was charming, attentive, and clearly devoted to Rachel. Their parents loved him. Rachel's friends envied her. Even Isabella's own friends commented on how lucky Rachel was to have found such a perfect man. The first real warning sign had come during the bachelorette party weekend in Las Vegas. Isabella had organized the trip carefully, knowing Rachel preferred intimate gatherings to wild parties. But on the second night, when Rachel had had too much to drink, she'd started crying in their hotel room. "I'm scared, Izzy," Rachel had whispered. "What if I'm not good enough for him? What if I disappoint him? What are you talking about? Marcus adores you. He has all these expectations about how I should dress, how I should act at his business dinners, what kind of career I should have after we're married. He thinks I should consider switching to family law, something more compatible with raising children." Isabella had been concerned but attributed Rachel's worries to pre-wedding jitters. Marcus's expectations sounded controlling, but Rachel had always been someone who sought approval from authority figures. Their father had been demanding throughout their childhood, and Rachel had learned to excel by anticipating and meeting his expectations. "Talk to him about it," Isabella had advised. "If he loves you, he'll want you to be happy in your career." I tried. He said we'd discuss it after the honeymoon, that I shouldn't worry about career complications while we're planning our future family. The conversation had stuck with Isabella, but she'd pushed her concerns aside. Rachel was an adult, a successful attorney, who could certainly handle her own relationship decisions. And Marcus did seem to love her, even if his vision of their future was more traditional than Isabella would have chosen for herself. The wedding had been perfect, a lavish affair at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel with 200 guests, a 10-piece orchestra, and enough flowers to stock a botanical garden. Rachel had looked radiant walking down the aisle, and Marcus had tears in his eyes as they exchanged vows. Isabella had given a toast about the power of true love and the joy of watching her sister find her perfect match. The problems had started almost immediately after the honeymoon. Rachel had called Isabella 2 weeks after returning from their trip to Italy, her voice strained and careful in a way that made Isabella's social worker instincts prickle with concern. "Marcus thinks it would be better if I didn't work such long hours," Rachel had said. "He's concerned about the stress affecting my health, and he wants me to be available for more social events with his colleagues. What do you want?" "I want to make my marriage work. Marcus knows more about these things than I do. He's been to all these medical society events, knows what's expected of doctors' wives." Isabella had bitten her tongue, recognizing the language of someone who was already learning to subordinate her own desires to her partner's expectations. But Rachel was newly married, still in the adjustment phase. Lots of couples went through periods of negotiating roles and responsibilities. Over the next few months, the changes in Rachel had been gradual but noticeable. She'd started declining invitations to their monthly sister dinners, saying Marcus preferred her to be home in the evenings. She'd stopped talking about interesting cases at work, instead focusing conversations on Marcus's career achievements and social obligations. Most concerning to Isabella, Rachel had begun to lose weight and seemed constantly tired. When Isabella had asked about it, Rachel had explained that she was trying to get in better shape, that Marcus had suggested they both commit to healthier lifestyles. "He's a doctor, Izzy. He knows what's best for our health." The real breaking point had come 6 months into the marriage, when Isabella had stopped by Rachel's condo, unannounced, to drop off a birthday gift. Marcus had answered the door, and Isabella had been shocked by Rachel's appearance when she'd emerged from the bedroom. Her sister had lost at least 20 pounds, her clothes hanging loose on her small frame, dark circles under her eyes making her look exhausted and hollow. "Rachel, are you okay? You look—" "She's been having some health issues," Marcus had interrupted smoothly. "Nothing serious, just some dietary adjustments we've been working on. I've been monitoring her nutrition to help her feel better." Rachel had nodded along with this explanation, but Isabella had noticed how she'd avoided eye contact, how she'd seemed nervous and fidgety throughout the brief visit. That night, Isabella had called Rachel's office and learned that her sister had been taking an unusual amount of sick leave recently, often calling in at the last minute with various ailments. Isabella's training as a social worker had taught her to recognize the signs of domestic abuse, but it was hard to accept that her sister, a successful attorney who'd always been strong and independent, could be a victim. Marcus was charming, well-respected, and showed no obvious signs of violent tendencies. But the pattern of isolation, control, and physical changes in Rachel was textbook. Isabella had tried to approach the subject carefully during their next phone conversation. "Rachel, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? If something was wrong in your marriage, if Marcus was—" "Stop." Rachel's voice had been sharp, almost panicked. "Marcus is wonderful. I'm lucky to have him. I don't know why you keep trying to find problems where there aren't any. I'm worried about you. You seem different since the wedding, and you look like you've been sick." "I'm fine. My husband is taking excellent care of me. Maybe if you focused more on your own life instead of trying to find fault with mine, you'd be happier." The conversation had ended badly, with Rachel hanging up on Isabella for the first time in their lives. After that, communication between the sisters had dwindled to brief, superficial exchanges during family gatherings. Isabella had spent weeks agonizing over what to do. She'd researched domestic abuse resources, consulted with colleagues who specialized in intimate partner violence, and tried to figure out how to help someone who didn't want to be helped. The decision to investigate Marcus had come after Isabella had run into one of Rachel's co-workers at a coffee shop. The woman had expressed concern about Rachel's recent behavior at work, mentioning that she'd seemed distracted and fearful, often jumping when her phone rang and making excuses to leave early for appointments. She used to be so confident. You know, now she seems like she's walking on eggshells all the time, the co-worker had said. That night, Isabella had made a choice that would change everything, using her connections in social services and her ex-boyfriend's access to private investigation resources. She'd started quietly looking into Marcus Morrison's background. What she'd found had been worse than her worst fears. Marcus had been married before, twice. His first wife, Jennifer, had died in what was ruled an accidental drowning during their honeymoon in Mexico. His second wife, Patricia, had died in a car accident, after what friends described as a tumultuous marriage marked by Patricia's increasing isolation and erratic behavior. But it was the medical records that had made Isabella's blood run cold. Both women had been treated for eating disorders during their marriages to Marcus. Both had been hospitalized for malnutrition and what doctors had diagnosed as anxiety-related health issues. Both had been prescribed medications for depression and panic attacks. The pattern was clear to Isabella. Marcus was systematically destroying his wife's health through psychological manipulation and possibly direct interference with their nutrition and medical care. As a cardiac surgeon, he had the medical knowledge to disguise abuse as health concerns, to manipulate women into believing their deteriorating condition was due to their own inadequacies rather than his deliberate sabotage. Isabella had also discovered that Marcus had significant gambling debts and had benefited financially from both of his previous wives' deaths through life insurance policies. Rachel, as a successful attorney with substantial earning potential, represented both a financial asset and a potential victim. The most damning evidence had come from Patricia's sister, who'd agreed to speak with Isabella after learning about Rachel. Patricia had confided in her sister about Marcus's controlling behavior, his manipulation of her eating habits, and his practice of secretly medicating her food to make her sick and dependent on him. Patricia tried to leave him, the sister had told Isabella. She'd packed a bag and was planning to file for divorce. The car accident happened the night before she was supposed to meet with her attorney. Isabella had faced an impossible choice. She had evidence that her sister was married to a man who had possibly murdered 2 previous wives and was in the process of systematically destroying Rachel's health and independence. But she had no legal proof of wrongdoing, and Rachel was clearly too isolated and manipulated to believe accusations against her husband. Isabella had decided to confront Marcus directly, hoping to gather evidence of his behavior or force him to reveal his true nature. She'd arranged to meet him for coffee, ostensibly to apologize for her concerns and try to repair their relationship, for Rachel's sake. Marcus had been charming and understanding, accepting her apology graciously and expressing concern for Rachel's stress levels. But when Isabella had mentioned Patricia's sister and some of the things she'd learned about his past, Marcus's demeanor had changed completely. "I think you should be very careful about spreading rumors, Isabella," he'd said quietly, his voice taking on a threatening tone she'd never heard before. "False accusations can destroy lives, and I have resources to protect myself and my reputation. Rachel depends on me now, and I'd hate for her to lose her sister because of some misguided investigation." The threat had been clear, but it had also confirmed Isabella's worst fears. Marcus knew she was investigating him, and he was prepared to retaliate. Isabella had made copies of all her evidence and sent them to Rachel with a detailed letter, explaining what she'd discovered about Marcus's past and her concerns for Rachel's safety. She'd begged her sister to consider the possibility that her health problems and increasing isolation were not coincidental, that her husband might be deliberately harming her. Rachel's response had been swift and devastating. She'd called Isabella, screaming with rage and betrayal, "How dare you? How dare you investigate my husband behind my back? How dare you try to destroy my marriage with these insane conspiracy theories? Rachel, please just look at the evidence. Look at what happened to his other wives. You're sick, Isabella. You're jealous and bitter because I found happiness. Marcus showed me your letter, showed me all your so-called evidence. It's all lies and twisted interpretations. Jennifer and Patricia were troubled women with eating disorders and mental health issues. Marcus tried to help them, just like he's trying to help me get healthy. Rachel, you're losing dangerous amounts of weight. You're isolated from everyone who cares about you. This isn't health, it's abuse. You're the abusive one. You're trying to manipulate me into leaving the best thing that's ever happened to me. Marcus is right. You need professional help. The conversation had ended with Rachel telling Isabella that she never wanted to see her again, that she was choosing her husband over a sister who would stoop to such despicable behavior. Within days, the story of Isabella's investigation had spread through their family and social circle. Rachel had told everyone that Isabella had hired private investigators to spy on Marcus, that she'd contacted his deceased wives' families to spread malicious rumors, that she was attempting to destroy a marriage out of jealousy and mental instability. Their parents had been horrified by Isabella's actions. Their father had called Isabella to express his disappointment and shame, telling her that her behavior was bringing dishonor to the family. Their mother had cried, asking how Isabella could be so cruel to her own sister. Rachel is happy. Their mother had said, Marcus is a good man from a good family. Why would you try to ruin that? Friends had taken sides, and most had chosen Rachel. Marcus was well-liked and respected in their social circle, while Isabella's accusations seemed far-fetched and motivated by sibling rivalry. People whispered that Isabella had always been jealous of Rachel's success, that she couldn't stand to see her younger sister surpass her in happiness and social status. Isabella had lost not just her sister, but most of her extended family and social network. She'd been branded as the jealous sister, the family troublemaker who'd tried to destroy an innocent marriage with fabricated evidence and malicious lies. The isolation had been devastating, but Isabella had held on to the belief that she'd done the right thing, that eventually Rachel would see the truth about Marcus. She'd continued to monitor the situation from a distance, staying in touch with Rachel's co-workers, and hoping for an opportunity to help when Rachel was ready to accept it. Now, 6 months later, Rachel was sitting on her couch with a black eye and terror in her voice, finally ready to acknowledge what Isabella had tried to warn her about. Tell me what happened, Isabella said gently, holding her sister while she cried. I found the pills, Rachel whispered. The ones he's been putting in my food. I've been so sick, Izzy, so tired and weak and confused. I thought I was losing my mind. What pills? Sedatives, appetite suppressants, stuff that was making me sick. I found them hidden in his medical bag along with photos. Rachel's voice broke completely, and she couldn't continue for several minutes. Photos of what? Of me. Unconscious. In positions, doing things I don't remember. And photos of Patricia and Jennifer. The same kinds of photos. Isabella felt sick, realizing that Marcus's abuse had included sexual assault of his unconscious wives, documenting his crimes as trophies. There were files, too. Medical records showing how he'd been monitoring our health, tracking weight loss, documenting symptoms, like we were experiments. How did you find all this? I got suspicious last month when I woke up feeling strange after dinner, when I couldn't remember going to bed. I started pretending to take the vitamins he gave me, started paying attention to when I felt sick versus when I felt normal. Rachel explained how she'd gradually realized that her mysterious health problems correlated directly with the supplements Marcus insisted she take and the meals he prepared for her. When she'd felt well enough to think clearly, she'd searched his study and found evidence of systematic poisoning and abuse. He's been documenting everything, Izzy. Every symptom, every pound I lost, every time I was too weak to work or see friends. He was proud of it. Did he catch you looking through his files? He came home early from the hospital. I tried to put everything back, but he knew. He saw the fear in my face and just smiled. That's when I knew I was in real danger. Rachel described the confrontation that had followed, how Marcus had calmly explained that she belonged to him now, that she was too weak and too compromised to ever leave him, that no one would believe her accusations against a respected surgeon. He said what happened to Jennifer and Patricia would happen to me if I tried to expose him. He said it would look like suicide, the depressed, unstable wife of a prominent doctor who couldn't handle the pressure of her marriage. How did you get away? He gave me what he thought was a sedative, but I'd learned to hide the pills under my tongue. I pretended to pass out, then escaped when he left for his night shift at the hospital. Isabella held her sister tighter, her mind racing through options for keeping Rachel safe. Marcus would discover her escape soon, and he had resources, connections, and a reputation that would make him dangerous to cross. We need to go to the police. With what proof? He's a respected doctor, and I'm a woman who's been acting erratically. For months, he set it up perfectly. I look mentally unstable, and he looks like the concerned husband trying to help me. Isabella realized Rachel was right. Marcus had spent months systematically destroying her credibility, creating a paper trail that would support his claims about her mental instability. The photos and files Rachel had seen could be dismissed as the delusions of a disturbed woman, especially if Marcus had time to destroy or hide the evidence. Then we run, tonight. We get you somewhere safe and figure out how to build a case against him. Isabella helped Rachel pack a bag, then drove her to a domestic violence shelter in Tacoma where Isabella had connections. The director was someone Isabella had worked with professionally, someone who understood the complexities of abuse cases involving wealthy, powerful perpetrators. Over the next few days, Isabella and Rachel worked with attorneys and investigators to build a case against Marcus. They discovered that he'd been under investigation by the medical board for suspicious patient deaths, that his gambling debts were more extensive than anyone had realized, and that he'd taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Rachel just 2 months after their wedding. Most importantly, they found Jennifer's sister, who'd been harboring suspicions about her sister's death for years. When presented with the pattern Isabella had uncovered, she agreed to push for Jennifer's body to be exhumed and re-examined. The investigation into Marcus Morrison became a media sensation. The respected cardiac surgeon was arrested on charges including attempted murder, sexual assault, insurance fraud, and 2 counts of murder in the deaths of his previous wives. The evidence Rachel had discovered in his study, combined with exhumed remains showing evidence of poisoning, created an overwhelming case against him. During the trial, the full scope of Marcus's crimes was revealed. He'd been systematically selecting successful, independent women, marrying them quickly, then destroying their health and autonomy through calculated poisoning and psychological manipulation. The goal was always financial: life insurance payouts, inheritance, access to his wife's earning potential. But Marcus had also clearly enjoyed the process of controlling and destroying strong women. Rachel testified about her experience, describing how Marcus had gradually isolated her from friends and family, how he'd made her doubt her own perceptions and memories, how he'd made her physically dependent on him while convincing everyone else that he was devoted to caring for his sick wife. He didn't just want to kill me, Rachel told the court. He wanted to completely erase who I was first. He wanted to turn me into a helpless shell of myself before he finished the job. The defense tried to portray Rachel as an unstable woman, seeking attention, but the physical evidence was overwhelming. Marcus was convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, Isabella and Rachel began the slow process of rebuilding their relationship and their lives. Rachel had resigned from her law firm during the investigation, unable to handle the stress of her job, while dealing with the trauma of her marriage and recovery from Marcus's systematic poisoning. "I owe you everything," Rachel told Isabella, as they sat in Isabella's apartment 6 months after Marcus's conviction. "You saved my life, and I repaid you by calling you a traitor, by choosing him over you. You were being manipulated and literally poisoned. You weren't thinking clearly. But you were. You saw through him when everyone else, including me, was fooled. And when I attacked you for trying to help me, you didn't give up. You waited for me to need you. Isabella looked at her sister, still thin but healthier than she'd been in over a year, color returning to her cheeks and strength returning to her voice. I'm a social worker, Rachel. I'm trained to recognize abuse patterns, but more than that, I'm your sister. I wasn't going to let someone hurt you, even if you hated me for trying to protect you. Do you think our family will ever forgive us? For all the drama, for the trial, for being wrong about Marcus? Isabella considered the question. Their parents had been devastated to learn the truth about Marcus, ashamed that they'd been so completely deceived and that they'd condemned Isabella for trying to expose the truth. Some family members and friends had apologized, but others remained distant, uncomfortable with the reminder of how wrong they'd been. The people who matter will come around, Isabella said, and the ones who don't, maybe they weren't really on our side to begin with. What about you? How do you move forward after everyone called you a traitor for trying to save someone you love? Isabella thought about the months of isolation, the friends who'd abandoned her, the family members who'd questioned her motives and her sanity. She thought about the nights she'd wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, if her suspicions about Marcus were just projections of her own issues with trust and relationships. I learned that sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to be the villain in everyone else's story, she said finally. People want to believe in happy endings, in perfect marriages, in men like Marcus who seem too good to be true. When you challenge those beliefs, when you insist on looking deeper, you become the problem. But you were right. This time, but what if I'd been wrong? What if Marcus had been exactly